Maybe you were there. Or perhaps on a similar night, in a similar club, when the disco ball spun and you lost yourself on the dance floor. You know that feeling, the music wraps around you, the lights dazzle your eyes, and in that moment, just that moment, you're living in a world where nobody judges you. In 1979, at San Francisco's Warfield Theatre, the crowd was feeling exactly that while Sylvester owned the stage. Until one man, filled with rage, shouted and shattered everything. But what happened that night wasn't just a musical disagreement. What Sylvester did was lift someone up instead of putting them down. He brought him onto the stage instead of throwing him out. And this became one of disco's most unforgettable moments. Because that night, everyone understood something profound: being under the lights wasn't just about shining yourself, it was about making others shine too. Before we continue with this extraordinary story, if you appreciate real stories about music history and the hidden moments that changed culture forever, hit that subscribe button right now. What happens next will surprise you. Sylvester James Jr. didn't arrive at the Warfield Theatre by accident that August night in 1979. His journey began 3 decades earlier in a Pentecostal church in Los Angeles, where a 3-year-old boy opened his mouth and gospel music poured out like he'd been born singing. His grandmother Julia, who everyone called Juju, recognized something divine in that voice. She told his mother Letha that this child would move thousands someday. But nobody predicted the price he'd pay for that gift, or the courage it would demand just to exist as himself. By 13, the church that nurtured his talent threw him out. His sexuality became incompatible with their doctrine, and young Sylvester found himself navigating a world that wanted him invisible. At 15, he was sneaking into gay clubs, wearing makeup, expressing himself in ways that terrified his mother but felt like breathing to him. When graduation day arrived in 1969, Sylvester showed up in a blue chiffon dress for his senior photo. School officials tried to stop him. He wore it anyway. That refusal to shrink, that insistence on being seen exactly as he was, became the foundation of everything that followed. San Francisco called to him in 1970 like a beacon. The Castro district was transforming into a sanctuary, and when Sylvester joined the Cockets, a psychedelic drag troupe performing midnight shows, he found his artistic family. They were outrageous and fearless, catching attention from celebrities like Truman Capote when they performed in New York. But Sylvester wanted more than underground fame. He wanted his voice to reach the mainstream world that pretended people like him didn't exist. The problem was that mainstream success demanded compromise, and compromise meant erasure. His first attempts at commercial success crashed spectacularly. 2 albums with his hot band on Blue Thumb Records in the mid-70s barely registered. Critics called his falsetto voice uncomfortable, too unusual, incompatible with rock instrumentation. Record executives suggested he tone down his appearance, dress more masculine, hide the parts of himself that made middle America uncomfortable. Sylvester refused every single suggestion. He had spent his childhood hiding and swallowing his truth to avoid condemnation. Success wouldn't make him do it again. But this defiance came with consequences: empty venues, dismissive reviews, and mounting debt that threatened to end his career before it truly began. Then came 1977 and a contract with Fantasy Records. This time Sylvester made a crucial decision that changed everything. He recruited 2 backing vocalists named Martha Wash and Azora Rhodes, women whose voices could match his power. Together they created something unprecedented, a gospel choir structure transplanted into disco, spiritual force dressed in sequins. When Step 2 dropped in 1978, the world wasn't ready but couldn't look away. You Make Me Feel Mighty Real climbed to number 1 on the Billboard dance chart, and suddenly Sylvester wasn't just a San Francisco phenomenon anymore. The song's pulsating synthesizers, crafted by producer Patrick Cowley, merged with Sylvester's soaring falsetto to create something transcendent. It became an anthem not just for dancing but for existing, for being seen, for refusing to apologize. Dance disco heat followed right behind it, cementing his status. By summer of 1979, Sylvester had become royalty. Mayors handed him keys to cities. Sold-out shows stretched from San Francisco to London to Mexico City. Fame had arrived, but it brought complications that nobody warned him about. Financial pressures mounted despite his success. Fantasy Records owed him over $218,000 in royalties by some accounts, but he'd only received $20,000. Legal battles with managers drained his energy and resources. The Disco Sucks movement was beginning, that ugly backlash where angry rock fans literally burned disco records at baseball stadiums. Many historians now recognize this movement had homophobic and racist undertones, targeting a genre that gave voice to Black, Latino, and queer artists. Sylvester stood at the center of it all, defiant but exhausted. August 3, 1979. The Warfield Theatre show was supposed to be pure celebration, another triumph in an ascending career. The venue packed with fans who knew every word, who came not just to hear music but to experience liberation. Sylvester walked onto that stage wearing a costume that sparkled under the lights, his presence commanding the space. Martha and Azora flanked him, ready to lift their voices in that signature three-part harmony. The opening notes began and the audience erupted in joy. Then came the shout that nobody expected. Frank Malone sat in the third row, his face twisted with anger. He'd come reluctantly, dragged by friends who insisted he needed to get out, to stop wallowing. Frank had just lost his job at the shipyard after 17 years when automation gutted the workforce. His wife left him 6 months earlier, taking their daughter to Sacramento. He was drinking too much, sleeping too little, and everything felt like it was crumbling. Seeing Sylvester's glamorous presentation, hearing disco music that reminded him of everything changing too fast in the world, something snapped inside him. "This stage belongs to real artists," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the music. "Play real music, not this disco garbage." The crowd's energy shifted instantly. Security guards started moving toward Frank, their faces stern and ready for removal. The audience began booing, defending their idol. On stage, Sylvester stopped singing mid-phrase. He held up one glittering hand, and impossibly, the entire theater fell silent. Even the band stopped playing, uncertain what their leader wanted. What happened next became the subject of legend for decades. Sylvester stepped to the edge of the stage, his heels clicking against the wood, and looked directly at the man who had disrupted his performance. The spotlight followed him, illuminating his face. The audience could see he wasn't angry. He was curious, as if he saw something in Frank that others couldn't. "Sweetheart," Sylvester said, his voice carrying that unique blend of strength and gentleness, "there's room on this stage. But only for those who have the courage." He extended his hand toward Frank. "You want music with soul? Come on up here and show us yours." The theater held its collective breath. Frank stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, confusion, embarrassment, defiance. Security guards paused, waiting for Sylvester's signal. Martha and Azora exchanged glances backstage, wondering if their singer had lost his mind. The audience remained suspended in that moment, uncertain whether to cheer or jeer. Then Frank climbed onto the stage. He found himself standing under lights designed to make stars shine, facing hundreds of people, next to a performer who had just invited his heckler to share his spotlight. Sylvester turned to his band and spoke quietly. The piano player nodded and began playing the opening notes to A Change Is Gonna Come, Sam Cooke's civil rights anthem. Sylvester handed Frank the microphone, and the entire room waited to see what would happen next. Frank held that microphone like it might explode. The song's first verse approached and he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He tried again, managing a few words before his voice cracked and failed. The audience stirred, some preparing to laugh, others feeling second-hand embarrassment so intense they wanted to look away. Frank's hands shook. Sweat appeared on his forehead. He had shouted demands from the safety of the crowd, but standing exposed under these lights revealed the vast distance between criticizing and creating. Then Sylvester did something that witnesses would describe years later with voices still thick with emotion. He stepped closer to Frank, not aggressively but protectively, and placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder. The gesture radiated compassion rather than condescension. He leaned toward the microphone and spoke softly, his words meant for Frank but audible throughout the theater. "Forget the words, honey. Just tell us what you're feeling. Nobody here is judging you." Frank's face contorted. His jaw worked silently for several seconds. Then, instead of singing, he began speaking, his voice rough and breaking. "Nobody listens to me anymore. I lost everything. My job. My family. I just wanted to be heard once. Just once, I wanted someone to know I exist." The theater fell into profound silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It had transformed into something raw and real, a confession happening in the last place anyone expected. Frank's words exposed a pain that transcended his personal circumstances and spoke to something universal, the desperate human need to matter, to be acknowledged, to have your existence recognized by others. Sylvester took the microphone back, but he didn't push Frank away. Instead, he kept his arm around the man's shoulders and began singing "A Change Is Gonna Come" himself, his falsetto wrapping around Sam Cooke's lyrics about hardship and hope. His voice transformed Frank's confession into something bigger, reframing it within a song about survival and perseverance. Martha and Izora joined in, their harmonies creating a gospel sound that turned the Warfield Theatre into a church. The audience, released from the tension, began swaying. Some people wept openly. When the song ended, Sylvester turned to Frank and said something that only a few people near the stage could hear. Those who caught it reported that he told Frank, "You shine brighter when you're honest than when you're angry." Then he gestured to his tour manager standing in the wings. What happened after the concert finished would change Frank's life in ways nobody could predict. The official story that circulated in newspapers the next day presented a sanitized version: quirky performer handles heckler with grace. But the people who were backstage that night saw something different unfold. Sylvester didn't lecture Frank about respect or tolerance. He didn't demand an apology or use the moment to grandstand. Instead, he sat with Frank in his dressing room while removing his stage makeup, and he listened. Frank talked for nearly an hour. He spoke about feeling invisible, about walking through a world that treated him as an obstacle rather than a person. He described the humiliation of unemployment, of watching younger workers with college degrees take positions that experience should have earned him. He talked about his 8-year-old daughter living with his ex-wife, and how he couldn't afford to visit anymore. He admitted that seeing Sylvester's confidence had triggered something in him, a rage that wasn't really about disco music at all but about feeling powerless in a life that kept shrinking. Sylvester listened without interruption. When Frank finally ran out of words, Sylvester spoke about his own invisibility, the years of being told he was too much and not enough simultaneously. He talked about churches that wanted his voice but rejected his soul, record executives who wanted to profit from his talent while erasing his identity. He explained that visibility wasn't the same as acceptance, that standing under spotlights could make you feel more alone than hiding in darkness ever did. Then Sylvester made Frank an offer. His tour needed additional crew members for the upcoming West Coast dates. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it covered expenses and provided a salary. Frank could work with the stage setup team if he wanted. No special treatment, no charity, just honest work helping build the stages where others performed. Frank accepted, and for the next 4 months, he traveled with Sylvester's tour. The crew members, mostly young queer people who had also been rejected by conventional society, took him in without judgment. They taught him about rigging lights, about sound system calibration, about the 1,000 small details that transform an empty room into a space where magic happens. Frank, who had been shouting about real artistry from his seat, learned about the actual work that went into creating moments of transcendence. The transformation wasn't dramatic or immediate. Frank didn't suddenly become an activist or a disco convert. But slowly, working alongside people he had previously seen as other, he began recognizing their humanity. He heard their stories of rejection and resilience. He watched Sylvester treat everyone from venue janitors to record label executives with the same respect and warmth. He saw how chosen family could be stronger than blood family, how communities could form around shared values rather than shared DNA. What most people never knew was how much that night at the Warfield cost Sylvester personally. His manager Tim McKenna was furious, arguing that inviting a heckler onto the stage set a dangerous precedent, that had made Sylvester look weak. Record label executives expressed concerns about unpredictability, suggesting such moments could damage his marketability. Some industry insiders whispered that Sylvester was too soft, too emotional, that his decision came from trauma rather than strength. Even close friends questioned the choice. Why risk his reputation and safety for a stranger who tried to ruin his show? Why give a platform to someone who represented the closed-minded thinking that made their lives difficult? Sylvester's answer revealed something essential about his character. In a backstage conversation that Martha Wash later recounted, he explained that he saw himself in Frank's anger. When I was coming up, he told Martha, nobody handed me a microphone when I was angry. I had to steal every inch of space, fight for every moment of recognition. Maybe if someone had stopped and actually listened to me when I was hurt and lashing out, I wouldn't have spent so many years believing I didn't deserve to be heard. This philosophy of radical empathy came at a price. The stress of constant performance, of being simultaneously a musical artist and a political symbol, began taking its toll on Sylvester's health. He developed neuropathy, experienced persistent coughs that doctors dismissed as bronchitis. By 1987, he spent 5 weeks hospitalized for what they eventually recognized as HIV-related pneumonia. AIDS had already devastated the communities Sylvester called home. Patrick Cowley, the producer who created the synthesizer sounds that defined his biggest hits, died of AIDS complications in November 1982. Rick Cranmer, Sylvester's partner, died in September 1987. Sylvester received his own HIV-positive diagnosis in 1987, and unlike many celebrities of that era, he didn't hide it. In an appearance on The Joan Rivers Show, he openly discussed his relationship with Rick and his illness, a revelation that shocked Rick's family, who learned about their son's relationship in real time during the broadcast. His final public appearance at the Dreamland nightclub in San Francisco illustrated his refusal to disappear. Friends and medical professionals advised him to rest, but Sylvester insisted on one last show. DJ Steve Fabus prepared a special set honoring Sylvester's career. When Sylvester entered the club, too weak to perform but determined to be present, the crowd erupted in chants of "We Love You" that continued for several minutes. He sat in a chair near the DJ booth and smiled at his people while they danced to the music he had helped create. It wasn't a performance. It was a goodbye. Sylvester James Jr. died on December 16, 1988, at age 41. In his will, he left all music royalties to AIDS service organizations, ensuring his songs would continue fighting the disease that killed him. Every time someone played "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" or "Dance Disco Heat," they were contributing to care for people living with HIV. His generosity extended beyond his death, transforming his artistic legacy into a practical tool for survival. Frank Malone attended Sylvester's funeral. By that point, he had moved on from the touring crew and found steady employment at a theater in Sacramento, doing backstage work he'd learned during those 4 months on the road. At the memorial service, Frank approached Martha Wash and Izora Rhodes and told them something he had never said publicly: that night at the Warfield had saved his life. He had been planning to end things the following week, had already written notes to his daughter and ex-wife. Feeling seen by Sylvester, being offered genuine purpose instead of judgment, had given him a reason to keep going. Martha later reflected that Frank's revelation captured something essential about Sylvester's impact. Yes, he was a musical icon who influenced generations of performers and helped pioneer sounds that would evolve into house music and modern pop. Yes, he broke barriers as an openly gay black artist in an industry that wanted him closeted and marginalized. But perhaps his most profound legacy was simpler: he saw people. He looked at individuals that society taught him to dismiss or fear, and he chose to recognize their humanity. Before he died in 2003, Frank gave one final interview to a small LGBTQ publication in Sacramento, where he reflected on that night at the Warfield Theatre 24 years earlier. "Sylvester didn't humiliate me by putting me on that stage," Frank said. "He saved my life by letting me be seen. That's what real artistry is. Not the singing, though God knows he could sing. But the willingness to share the spotlight, to make room for everyone under the lights." That night, disco didn't win. Humanity did. Today, "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" is preserved in the National Recording Registry by the Library of Congress, recognized as culturally and historically significant. Rolling Stone ranks Sylvester among the 200 greatest singers of all time. The Rainbow Honor Walk in San Francisco includes him among LGBTQ pioneers whose legacy shaped the city. His music appears in films and television shows, introducing new generations to that falsetto voice and those synthesizer beats that defined an era. But beyond official recognitions, Sylvester's influence lives in less quantifiable ways. Young queer people discovering his music find permission to be themselves, to refuse demands that they shrink or hide. Artists across genres cite him as inspiration, proof that you can remain authentic while achieving mainstream success. AIDS organizations continue receiving support from his royalties decades after his death. And somewhere, in ways we can't fully track, his approach to that heckler on August 3, 1979, continues rippling outward. It offers an alternative model for responding to opposition, a reminder that the most radical act might not be destroying your enemies but recognizing their humanity. It suggests that stages exist not just for stars but for anyone brave enough to step into the light, even if their voice cracks, even if they forget the words, even if they arrived angry and left transformed. The Warfield Theatre still stands in San Francisco, hosting concerts and events, its walls holding memories of thousands of performances. On some nights, when the music swells and the crowd loses itself in rhythm and light, old-timers swear they can still feel something lingering in the air. Not a ghost exactly, but a presence. A reminder that this stage once hosted a moment when anger met grace, when pain met compassion, when a heckler became human and a star revealed the source of his light. Maybe you were there that night, or maybe you're just learning about it now. Either way, the question Sylvester posed remains: what do we do when confronted with someone's rage? Do we match it with our own? Do we dismiss them as unworthy? Or do we take the harder path, the one that requires looking past hostility to see the hurt beneath, the one that risks our comfort to offer someone else a moment in the light? Sylvester made his choice. The rest of us are still deciding.